Welcome to Under the Lab Coat, a podcast with minimal relevance and maximum science. This is your host, Rob, Sebastian,
Hello.
Hannah,
Hello, hello.
and Berie.
What? I forgot it was in his.
What?
So, guys, how's everyone been since the last time we all got together? Any exploits? Anything interesting going on in grad school?
I gave a seminar presentation to all of you guys.
That's right.
How did that go?
I think it went well. It was very nerve-wracking. Some people that I really hoped wouldn't show up didn't show up, so.
There are certain
Who is
PIs
that?
you have to look out for.
I don't want to say.
Oh, okay. We can talk about that later.
How about you, Rob? How is everything?
Wait. Hold on. Let's keep talking about me for a little
I'm
bit.
Sorry.
But what did you guys think about my presentation
I thought it was wonderful.
for first year? I mean, be honest.
I'm being honest.
super
I thought it was good.
Any things that I, maybe could work on?
I would have enjoyed a little bit more introduction. I think there were some questions that you got that could have been maybe anticipated a little better. Like, what is quinine? I think you said it's a taste-in, but I don't know. It's
Okay.
I would-
So
I would- I
I
would
should have
go-
said it's an anti-malarial drug.
I would just have a few more introductory slides. I study sensory perception. These are some things. These are other senses. I would just had again. I sort of front-loaded it a little bit more. So I think a lot of your questions that you got were more about it was more not what you did, 'cause I thought your data was good. It was more the why question that I think you could have, because it has to be interesting to people from other backgrounds.
I actually prepared a lot at the beginning of the presentation, and Hannah helped me a considerable amount, even though I forgot to write her name in the acknowledgments, which, again, sorry.
That's fine. I don't care.
But I was anticipating a lot more questions for that portion, because I was trying to kind of guide people into being like, oh, wait, but why that? And then I could, say, so yada, yada, yada. So,
I don't know. I think it was good. I think maybe if you can find a way to connect every piece of data with each other, because it felt very disconnected at some point.
it's a rotation.
Yeah, I
I was going
know.
to say, I think that's hard to do with a rotation.
Yeah, but I'm working on it. I do have some stuff that'll help link things better.
But I agree, it's a rotation project. It's hard to make it more connected.
Okay, enough spotlight.
Hannah, you were at a conference. Anything
I
fun
was
to
at
talk
a
about there?
conference. I was hoping you wouldn't bring this up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. You
No,
should've told me
that's okay.
beforehand.
Taboo topic.
It was stressful. The conference is several days, 4 or 5 days, and it's 8:30 a.m. until 10 at night. So a lot of work. And then also found out there's a competitor lab doing more or less my exact project. So now we're kind of concerned I'm going to be scooped. So we're kind of trying to push a paper out, which is a little premature, but
Well,
that's how it goes in science.
you gotta really, kind of stake out your area and
Plant a flag.
plant a flag. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of an unknown or an unspoken rule, right? That you don't work on something that other people are working on.
Yeah, but this guy has always broken that rule.
That's unfortunate.
In theory, it's an ethical rule, but more and more, and specifically, it started happening a lot in like cancer fields and very highly competitive fields where people were just scooping each other, and now it's going to other much more.
Funding is
basic.
making it a lot more difficult.
I think we should clarify for the audience what scooping really means. Scooping is when someone publishes a paper about exactly what you're doing before you get the chance to publish it. And when that happens, your work is now harder to publish because it's not novel. It's been shown before.
Yeah.
And it's likely to be published in a journal that's not as reputable.
Right.
Despite you having maybe initially found whatever it was that you were investigating, if they just, for let's say a conference, for example, if someone were to present a poster on something and a very big lab saw like this little undergraduate student off in Nebraska or something who works in a really small lab and generates data relatively slowly because it's one person versus like a team of postdocs, and they say, oh, that's really interesting, and with the 10 of us, we can just pound that out and get a free paper out of it. And that's why it's frowned upon and unethical, right? And you're screwing someone over when you're already strong.
That's a problem that's part of a bigger problem in how science works nowadays. In order to be successful, you have to publish a certain number of papers.
Yeah.
And so that pushes people to get those papers out in any possible way. And that's a problem with the way we found science. We gave money to science now. and that's part of a bigger problem that we can talk about. It's
Some other time, yeah.
And I don't want to overstate how big of an issue this is either. I mean, there's a few bad actors out there, but I think for the most part, the scientific community is one of sort of collaboration and supporting each other.
It's heavily dependent on.
We're not when you go to a conference. Yeah, you're talking about your ideas, and there's this possibility that maybe someone can steal your idea, but it's not something that we fear necessarily all the time.
Right. Majority of the time, people are decent and are aware of what you're working on and will try not to step on your toes.
Right.
And I completely understand if their research leads them into a direction that is stepping on someone's toes, right? They happened upon that. It wasn't that they stole the intellectual property from someone else and decided to pursue that. That is what I have a problem with.
Exactly. And that's obviously, and it's hard because in the scientific field, we don't have science police. You know, so much of this is all based on like an honor system that we're going to respect each other's boundaries and not steal these ideas. So it can be difficult to enforce, but again, usually it's not an issue, and this sort of predatory kind of behavior is not common. And like you said, it's because it's an honor system, but it's also a reputation kind of economy in the sense that once a scientist has some bad associations, they get kind of ostracized from the field, and people become very wary of them and don't want to,
share
maybe collaborate or share any data. And so it kind of self-corrects in that way. Sebastian, I think you've got some cool stuff going on. You're teaching high school students.
Yes,
the most
I was also hoping you were not going to bring that up.
Did they pronounce your name right? Did they say Mr. Rojas?
No, they don't call me Mr.
Sebastian.
What do they say?
They just call me Sebastian.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't make them call you Mr. Rojas?
Why would no?
Why not?
Well, okay. So for those of you that don't know, this summer, on top of my normal research, I've taken some extra hours to do some work teaching high schoolers that have shown interest into going into the medical field, and I'm basically in charge of teaching them the basic principles of science research, how basic science can be eventually applied to medicine, and how all these biological concepts tie up to the big picture of what diseases are.
I really wish they did something like that in Antigua. That's really cool that any high school kid can get something like that here.
It's a really great experience. It's really stressful, and it takes a lot of my own personal time to just prepare and be ready to talk to them. But yeah, I've been doing that. My research has been going well.
I think out of all of us, actually, you've taken the most time to teach. Because I believe you taught undergraduates for 2 semesters or 2 years? I don't remember.
So as part of my program, I had to be a teaching assistant for 2 semesters. Yes, right. And additionally, for an extra year, I've done some extra teaching in a program that is aimed at first generation freshman college students or freshman college students from defavorized background. So people that will normally struggle in the first year of biology in college, as to help them to get through the Bio 101 or Bio 110 and help them to not be discouraged by the possibility of following a career in the biological sciences,
right?
Which I think it's an important thing, and I really, really enjoy it. I love my research, but for me, these two sides of doing research, but actually also being able to share it with students as a teacher and mentor, and also being able to share with the general population, like we are doing here with the podcast.
Right. Right.
But yeah, that's.
So what about you, Rob?
I'm pretty excited. I got accepted into a science communication workshop at Cornell.
I didn't know that.
So yeah, it's a lot of fun. So I actually just got the roster of speakers. A lot of people from Cornell, but other people coming from NIH to talk about getting into particularly science journalism, but also avenues. Yeah, I think I mentioned it in my application. So I actually have to write a 3-page article. So we're going to do so it's meant for a general audience, and then we're going to be sort of peer reviewing that. And so I actually have to choose a topic, which I haven't really settled yet. I want to talk about, but I'm pretty excited.
Maybe you can talk about hyenas having sex or turtle fucking.
Yeah, because I think the average person is, if I go up to anybody, say in the supermarket, and be like, "Excuse me, do you know about turtle mating?" I really doubt that they would. And I would say two things. I would say, one, read my article.
And
And two,
and listen to our podcast.
Two, listen to our podcast.
Under
Because
the lab
you need
coat.
to know this.
It will change your life forever.
It's an experience, all right. Yeah.
I mean, but you do really cool stuff too, right? Like you went to, not saying that wasn't cool, but I mean, cool in that you were at the museum.
Yeah. So I do a lot of, or doing more so, presenting at the museum. This is actually really great because it's really, really young kids. They're like 5.
Yeah. So basically, you set the misconceptions, and then
Yeah.
Sebastian fixes them. Yes. And you do have a story in which,
Yeah, I
unfortunately for
screwed
that
this one kid
child.
up. So I was doing a exhibit on metamorphosis, right? And so I had flies because larvae become fruit flies, and I had some frogs because tadpoles become adult frogs. And I was trying to explain that different animals have different life stages and life cycles. And this one kid, I was showing him the fruit fly larvae, and I was like, "Hey man, you know what these turn into? They turn into fruit flies." He's like, "Wow, that's cool." And then he's like, "And they turn into frogs?" And I was like, "No, they're two different animals." He's like, "Then why do you have frogs here?" In that moment, I actually was like, "Why do I have frogs here?" Maybe I should not overwhelm these people. But like, he was so convinced that larvae mostly turn into flies, but sometimes turn into frogs. And his brother was like totally getting it, but this kid was lost. He was like 4. So Sebastian, you need to fix him
In the future.
in the future.
If a student randomly pops up, and he's like, "When are you going to talk about metamorphosis of flies into frogs?"
Yeah, exactly.
Just
He's
be
really-
like, "Oh, I know who you are."
I was joking though that one day I'm gonna walk into the lab and turn on the light, and it's just gonna be filled with frogs. And be like, "Oh my god, he was right."
Nice.
So yeah, this was the show, man. One, it's hard to explain these ideas,
Yeah.
and people have so much trust in us that if you give them the wrong bit of information, it's actually kind of hard to steer them back on the right course.
I think the whole autism thing is a great example of that.
The whole, I'm sorry.
Autism.
Oh, thanks.
That falsified study that
Yeah,
was retracted and is still
Right.
cited.
but it's like, but a scientist. I'm like, oh,
Do you know that guy's still going around and pushing that?
Yeah.
Even though
Yeah.
even though he's no longer a doctor anymore.
I'm
Yeah.
sure he's making some money off of it.
Of course he is.
So for those of our listeners who don't know, there was this scientist. When was it? In the 70s, 80s?
no, dude. It's like
No, this is
90s.
very recent.
Yeah,
Oh my god.
I think it was 1999.
This is a very recent thing that
This
happened.
is really sad. So this scientist, doctor, falsified a study that in his study he showed correlation between vaccines and autism.
Correlation is not causation.
Yes. Also, and then it was shown that
And it was also false.
and
Yeah.
the data was falsified. And
Which
then
means it
this-
was faked.
yes.
Just so people understand what that term means. When we say
So-
it was
He wanted some
falsified.
glory. He faked the study. He faked the results.
He got caught and he got kicked out of the medical and scientific community.
But
Right.
unfortunately, the
People
damage
are-
is
yeah.
done.
People are still citing this study as a valid reason as to why
You should not vaccinate.
you
your
shouldn't
children.
vaccinate.
And now, unfortunately, there's some MD who's talking about or really pushing spreading out vaccinations in order to
Right.
his rationale that it gets parents who would otherwise not vaccinate their children to vaccinate their children.
Right.
But the problem with that is he'll go on shows and he'll say things like, "Well, injections don't cause autism until they do." So
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's clear where his stance is.
Mhm.
And the fact that he's selling books that talks about these issues just shows that he saw, oh, that guy made money, and I can make money without losing my license, so I'm going to do that.
Which is why
Right.
it's important for everyone to not take anything you are told by face value. If someone tells you something, just take 5 minutes and look up to see whether or not there is actual scientific data that makes sense from what they're telling you.
Yeah, that's so true, right? I
Even
mean,
as far as going and getting a second opinion, right?
yeah.
Just
Yeah.
Google it.
Not everybody has the expertise. I mean, I encountered this being a scientist. If a physicist says something, I don't have the mathematical training, so I have to
Kind of
you know,
accept it.
kind of accept it, but ask several people their opinion. I mean, just
Yeah.
because a scientist, quote unquote, tells you that something is the case doesn't mean you should you shouldn't believe them. You know,
Mhm.
science is about being true to the evidence, and
Yep.
so you should look into it yourself.
And science
But
is
then, in the same sense, if you find one opinion that refutes it, don't say, okay, then they're lying and it's not true, because there's always going to be someone trying to make a case against something that
Right.
is most likely true.
It's to be critical, to take all different opinions and make your own opinion based on what the evidence tells you and what.
I'd be careful with that, because science isn't opinion based, right? It's fact based. So
For the most part, that's true, but your
Mhm.
data can only tell you so much, and you have to
Right.
extrapolate and interpret. People get interpretations wrong all the time.
Right.
That doesn't mean that the data isn't real or
True.
something. So
which is why I said just be careful with that. I was not right putting you down.
Right. But
Okay.
we are 4 scientists, and you should listen to us. And probably vaccinate your
And
kids.
believe everything that we say.
Yeah.
Listen to our podcast.
Also, send us money.
Listen to our podcast, subscribe, and if you know anyone that works on Apple, we are actively looking for some sponsors. So there you go.
I like to peruse YouTube on my iPhone 7 while I drink Pepsi Hot.
Oh God, we're not doing this again. But yeah,
Yeah.
donate to science. Look for a university nearby. Look for labs that work in invertebrates, and I don't know, throw some money at them. They'll
Just
appreciate
personally, if you see me around, I'd appreciate your money.
it.
it won't go towards scientific research.
It will go
It
towards.
will.
It will support
It will
my
go.
It'll support
research in
scientists.
some. It will keep me happy.
It will go to make us happy, and so we can do better science.
Because science is done by happy people.
Yes.
You don't want miserable scientists doing your experiments.
With that, we start our podcast after this 15-minute rambling.
It's
Yeah,
fine.
you
I'll
know,
edit it.
it's
I'll
we're
edit
talking
it.
about how science and society and politics all kind of intersect, which is kind of like what we wanted to talk about today, because there's this troubling story that I believe Sebastian would like to give us a primer on.
For those of you that don't know, a couple of weeks ago, the Turkish government decided to stop teaching evolution in high school, and so just basically wait until college to approach this topic. Their argument was that evolution is a quote-unquote controversial subject, and it has been excluded for students that, according to the government, are in an age that is yet unable to understand the issues and the scientific background. And this is, I don't know, what's your opinions about these guys, about this?
I think it's pretty hypocritical coming from what is a very heavily religious country, that they're saying that this is too complex. Obviously, I disagree with them wholeheartedly.
I mean, conceptually, it's not a hard concept to understand, right? I mean, I think the argument is flawed, and it's clearly just an excuse.
Yeah.
It's very much religiously motivated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very disturbing to see how in many countries there is this push to stop teaching evolution or to teach
Creationism.
alternative, without mentioning creationism, alternative points of view to evolution.
Oh, like alternative
right.
facts. We're going to start
Exactly.
teaching alternative
Alternative-
facts in
right.
school. Great.
Yes.
I'd like to point out, though, that this isn't so far away from the U.S. The U.S. has proponents that want to remove education that has to do with evolution from schools.
Oh, yeah.
There's a huge push for it. It's not such a far-fetched idea to think that this might happen here.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, especially now with this current wave of
Kind of political
populism
climate.
and,
Yeah.
I was doing some reading before this, and there are many states where they are not exactly pushing for banning evolution, but they are pushing for, and again, I'm quoting, teaching that evolution is just a theory, not a fact, and therefore there should be other theories that should be considered when talking about the origin of species and how human beings came to be into this planet.
And that's a common argument used that, evolution is just a theory.
Right.
Which is a big misconception about what scientists call a theory versus
Right.
what we call a fact, which is something that we want to touch on today.
So what about...
I mean, theory is almost an unfortunate bit of jargon, right? Because in its everyday usage, theory is something that just seems like kind of tenuous and it's sort of like
An idea.
just an idea, right?
Mhm.
Or sort of a
An
makeshift
This is
an
what I think.
assumption.
explanation. Yeah,
so
exactly.
much.
It's
Yeah.
very subjective, like my theory. But in science,
People almost treat it like
a theory is a very like prestigious title for
It takes a
an
while to
idea.
get there.
Yeah, it's basically
It's a
an idea
comprehensive-
that is the best. Yeah,
It's a comprehensive explanation
right,
that takes into account several different
right,
evident
right.
together to create this comprehensive hypothesis as a theory. So it's not just an idea that someone has, it's based on different approaches that have been tested and tested over years.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Right.
it's the best explanation that takes into account all the data
Like a lot of the
on a particular topic.
theories in physics, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, like atoms are the postulate of atomic theory, but no one doubts that we have atomic bombs, right? And
Yeah.
so it's
Or
clearly
something more relatable to regular people is the theory of gravity.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a
I've
theory.
never heard anyone say gravity is just a theory.
Yeah,
Mhm.
watch me float away. That's like your theory, bro. It's not my theory. Yeah.
Well, then
good luck with that.
how come humans can go to the moon and float and stuff? Sorry.
I can't even take that seriously.
I was really trying to make an argument against gravity, but
You realize
it's
how
about
absurd-
as stupid
Yeah.
and absurd as trying to make an argument against
But that should
gravity.
almost be how we feel about arguments against
That is
evolution.
exact-
We should
I
feel
mean-
that same absurdity.
Mhm.
And so, no, we don't. And I guess like I've like I
You
thought
don't?
about this.
I do. I
What?
feel it's absolutely absurd when I hear people say, well, how did humans come from monkeys? Which is not even...
They're not even correct.
Yeah.
That's
in
not
that
even...
statement.
That's a huge misconception about what evolution is teaching.
I guess I
Oops, sorry.
like probably a lot of us. I don't know about your background, Hannah, but I also grew up in a religious home. So I guess
Grew up
to
on a
me
religious
it's-
island.
yeah, very insular, right? I mean, I grew up on Long Island, all Catholics, man. So it's the same thing. Long Island, it always comes out. I can't say that like a normal person. Long Island, coffee and bagels. In any case, so yeah, I mean, I think that it's not I can see why people wouldn't think it's absurd because it's an explanation that
Yeah.
fits with their perception of reality,
Mhm,
and it's
mhm.
hard to think in the timescales that evolution requires. I guess where I come for this is that I don't want creationism to be taught as an alternative theory because it's not a scientific theory.
Right.
Right. It has no scientific basis whatsoever, and so I think it kind of cheapens any
Mhm.
sort of class that's going to be talking about biology to now say, oh, but there's this other idea called creationism. It doesn't belong there.
Because it's
So,
not a, it's a
it's not-
scientific
it's-
theory.
It's not a scientific theory. It's a belief.
It's a belief.
It's based on faith, and
And
so
that
it has
should
no
be
place to me.
separated.
Yeah, it has no place to me in a scientific classroom. Whether or not a school wants to have a theology class or something like that, I mean that's
Which is fine, right?
a separate
if
issue
you want to
to
push,
me.
if you want to push anything, push for a religious class,
Right.
or a class on religion.
And
Right.
what I found,
Yeah, but that's just going to also anger people because then they
Well,
have to be forced to
not a
recognize
mandatory one.
other... No, I don't mean a
Right,
mandatory
right.
one, but I foresee people being upset in
Mhm, mhm.
a class about religion that other religions will be taught. Right?
And then-
Inherently, you would have to talk about
Exactly.
several
So
religions.
it's
You
a
can't just talk
slippery
about
slope,
the
right?
predominant
Right,
religion.
Exactly.
Right. Which is
Very
obviously
slippery slope.
people that want creationism don't want that, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
they want their religion to be the right one.
And then you have the whole idea of reincarnation, and then that's another argument, and it just gets slippery slope.
What I also find fascinating about this is people argue that evolution cannot be real because they cannot see it happening. But if there are several studies that show
And also
how
the world is flat.
species, so the world is flat. There are several studies that show species that live next to each other that has over the years just diverged, and now they cannot reproduce with each other. And that's evolution happening. You have a single original species, and then by genetic chances, geographical differences, they diverge into two different species that cannot reproduce between themselves. And to me, it's absurd when people are like, "Oh, this is you cannot see evolution happening."
Can
I
I
think
make
it's-
a point real quick?
Go
Just
ahead.
like almost like a semantic issue.
Mhm.
The process of two species being developed is not, oh, now we have one species and now we have
Yeah.
a different species.
Mhm.
This is a very long, slow process that requires barriers to reproduction between the ancestral species that are
Mhm.
divided either geographically or there are several other barriers that can exist, such as
Mhm.
the time at which they copulate, etc. So I think for the most part, people have a very hard time conceptualizing what evolution in real time would even look like.
Right. And actually, I was going to kind of talk about that, right? Because people obviously look very different, even within the same races. And certain people that may look a little bit weird, like if someone has like an extra finger or something, or I don't know, a hunched back or something, like a mutation. Sorry, Rob. A mutation. or like when we look at, I don't know, if you want to get more fictional, you look at mutants, right? They have like something that's very different, something very divergent from what you see. Something very different from what you see in the normal populace. That's evolution at work, essentially.
I think you have to be careful though, because
Right.
there's variation within any given population.
Right.
And the way that evolution works is that there needs to be significant variation between two populations that eventually lead to reproductive barriers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but the first step for evolution is to have
some difference.
some big difference.
I agree,
And
which
that
is
was the
why-
only
a
point.
population.
That's a step. It's not. Evolution is not something that happens to individuals. It happens to groups.
Exactly.
Right.
But to come back to your point that for evolution to work, you have to fulfill these certain requirements, and that's absolutely true. And I think for the most part, people aren't even aware that that this is something that scientists talk about, that we recognize as like foundation to evolution. So for people who are not,
What are these steps, Hannah?
if you would let me finish, so for evolution to take place, it works through the mechanism of natural selection. For natural selection to happen, there has to be 4 requirements fulfilled. And the first one is that the environment that population is in cannot support all of those individuals. There has to be competition between individuals in a given population.
So basically, where you're living becomes too stressful.
Yeah, there
Or-
has to be some kind of competition for resources,
Okay.
right? Because if
Mhm.
everyone had all of the resources that they need, there would be no need to be better than another individual.
Right.
You're going to survive.
Mhm.
The second that you need for natural selection to take place is there has to be variation in the population already. That variation that exists in the population, that has to be inherited.
Mhm.
So it has to be genetic variation,
So you have to be able to pass it on to your children.
right?
Yeah.
And then lastly,
It's all right. I mean, I
Where's your
paused
cheat
when I was
sheet?
spelling elegance. It's all good.
I'm trying to think of what the last one is because now I can't remember. Oh, I remember. The last requirement that has to be fulfilled is that the variation that is inherited and already in the population, it has to confer some kind of benefit to the individuals that have that variation.
And that benefit is, we call that fitness. Which is
Mhm.
basically a measure now of this animal that has this advantage is now going to be able to produce more progeny, right?
Mhm.
And because these changes are heritable, they're
Wait, so kind of step back there.
Sure.
So you said that because they're more fit,
Yeah.
and they can survive better, they're going to have more
Well,
progeny.
the scientific
well,
fitness, the term
yeah.
fitness in science means the number of progenies
yeah.
or
That's how we measure fitness is
Yeah.
the number by a number of offspring.
it's not
Okay, good.
fitness
So-
as in
so-
how much sport
But
you
not
do.
just
Yeah.
number of
It's not like-
offspring.
Oh, I can bench press 370. No,
No, it's not strength. It has to do with how related you are to an individual and how many of those individuals exist.
Mhm.
So your
Right.
direct fitness is your direct progeny, your offspring,
Mhm.
times the relatedness, which is 1/2, because you pass on half of your genes to
Mhm.
them.
Right.
Your total fitness is your direct fitness plus your indirect fitness. So there are a lot of species that exhibit communal care for young,
Mhm.
and typically these are related siblings that take care of younger siblings, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so their indirect fitness would be however many siblings they're caring for times the relatedness to them, which would be 1/4, 1/2. I don't remember actually.
I do biology, not math.
Either way. So then you take those two values for fitness, add them together, that's your overall fitness for an animal.
Mhm.
So the more fit an animal is, the more progeny they have. This comes down to the level of the gene, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
The whole point is to maximize the number of your genes in the population. And so when you are fit, that proportion goes up in the population. And overall, populations can diverge from each other, right? Especially
Mhm.
geographically. That's the most common example because natural selection can change depending on what the environment is dictating.
Right. I think in biology, in like general biology, a great example they give is moths during the industrial age, right? Do you guys know?
Actually,
Everyone
no, no,
remembers
This has to
that?
do with the coloration of them.
Right.
Yeah.
So moths were predominantly white and colorful, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
during the industrial age, there was a lot of soot. So areas became, dusted with soot. So it became darker or gray and blackened areas. So because the white ones stood out, they were predominantly eaten by their predators because they could see them in the contrast with the soot in their surrounding areas.
Mhm.
Whereas the darker, the gray or the black moths were better camouflaged with the
Right.
soot that was present, and then they became the predominant population or
Sure.
contributor to the population.
Sure.
Mhm.
If you were like a purple moth, you were fucked.
Essentially,
Right
yeah.
away. Yeah. So that's an example of a deleterious mutation.
Or
right?
you're really high. Purple moth.
Yeah. Right. Predators are tripping out. But that, and then obviously this would have been a slow change, right? So you'd have had some darker and darker
Oh yeah, it took a while.
moths.
It took the entire industrial age.
Right, with each
Right.
passing generation, presumably there are more
Right.
and more individuals that have
Right.
the darker coloration.
And that's what we term selection, obviously.
And then
So
you
now
can-
there's a
you can
new
s-
trait on the variation because that variant is now better adapted to survive in that context. They pass on more of their genes.
Yeah. And you can see that happen faster with certain species over others, right? Because
Right.
the lifetime of a moth is much shorter
Right.
comparatively to a human,
Right.
which is much longer.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
I mean, we do these sort of these evolution on this smaller scale and lab all the time.
Mhm.
So you can grow bacteria that subsist on a certain substrate. And you can do this very quickly. because-
Substrate?
Yeah, say like a food source, right?
Mhm.
So maybe you add a food source that they don't really like, but after many rounds of replication, they're introducing new variation, and
The ones that are better
the
at
one that are better using
getting
that
nutrients
food,
from it.
yeah, using that nutrient will eventually now become quote unquote fixed.
Mhm.
There's a new genetic variant that's now has taken over the population. It's effectively evolution in real time.
And from a health standpoint of view, antibiotics, that's how you have populations that are resistant, bacterial populations that are resistant to antibiotics. All the bacteria that are affected by an antibiotic X die, and only those that are resistant survive, and they take over. And yeah, that's also evolution happening in real life scale.
Yeah,
Mhm.
or flu vaccines, right? You need a flu shot every year because the flu virus is
Changing all the time.
changing and
Mhm.
is now being able to evade the previous year's vaccination, immunization.
Immunization.
Anyway,
Oh, man, some words.
all of this is to say, science is real. I hope science is real. Evolution is real. It's not just one or two studies. There are several thousands of studies that show that it's happening at different levels.
Mhm.
And it's important for us as a society to teach these facts to the next generation. To teach the logic behind it, the simple experiments that were conducted to actually show that it happens.
Many times over.
Yes, a lot of the problem with it's not about teaching evolution, but it's how we teach it. We just teach a lot of science teaching nowadays is based on memorization, and so we don't teach the critical thinking required to actually understand what's the process behind the idea of evolution. Which is why older people are just like, no, this is nonsense.
Right.
I don't
I mean,
believe in this.
Scientists are somewhat to blame, right, for this
Yeah.
misconception that we evolved from monkeys. Because I think one of the really famous images that they like to show is a chimp slowly standing
Right.
upright and turning into a man. And
Right.
we just need to be a lot better at communicating science and being more
Right.
clear.
People have this idea that chimps. How come they're still chimps? Because we evolved from chimps. I mean, chimps are happy being chimps, right? There's some divergence in our past
Exactly.
where
We took
became
different
isolated.
courses.
Yeah, took different courses.
Mhm.
But it's not that you
But that's
come
to
back
point out that chimps didn't exist at that time, right? We had
Exactly.
an ancestor in
a
common
common
with that
ancestor. Yeah,
millions of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and through evolution
Right.
provided two separate lineages.
right.
Yep.
So it's not to say you come back a billion years later and you know, if you put chimps on Mars and you can support them somehow, you don't come back and they're humans.
Right.
They're most likely still gonna be hanging out in trees doing chimp things.
Yep, Mars trees.
Maybe that will be
Yeah,
different.
Mars trees.
Mars monkeys.
Yeah, maybe they would have adapted to that in to that environment, but you know, it's not that everything inevitably becomes humans. Like we're the best, you know. not every animal wants to become a human one day. They're perfectly happy just being the animals they
I would
are.
like to argue if we ever had to go back to the wild,
Yeah.
we would be severely unfit, and the majority of the population would die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except for the select few who have retained survival skills.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. But also, you know, it goes to show like how political science is. We think that it's not
what are you
that
telling me?
science is like this pure pursuit of knowledge, but ultimately we have to now explain this to the public, and people have different interests and goals, and unfortunately our work does become
Extremely
politicized.
political at times.
Yeah, so I would like to plug a great article I read yesterday that deals with this topic by Elizabeth Labato in The Verge called "Yes, Science is Political." And she has an excellent sentence that actually summarizes kind of all of this, is that science is the pursuit of knowledge, knowledge is power, and power is politics. So I think as scientists, you know, it's not enough to just do this work and shove it into a paper and then forget about it, you know, because some of these ideas and these results actually have really meaningful impacts on people's lives.
And science communication is important,
Yeah.
which is why we're doing what we're doing, which is why we go to conferences, we teach in museums,
Right.
we teach high schoolers,
Yeah.
because we want to be a part of a world where we can talk about our research and make people understand what it means, and that's not just shoving facts down people's throats.
And I think a really good book that I read that I actually really enjoyed, and even if you have like any kind of interest in science, which if you're listening to this you must, it's called The Gene. According to the iBooks review, inquiries into human heredity date back to Greek scholars like Pythagoras and Aristotle. But they talk about kind of how this idea of the gene developed and how
Right.
that developed through evolution, and they talk about some of the things that Darwin had to deal with when he was trying to push his theory, and just like all the little controversies and little quirky things, like certain famous scientists
Right.
that were in classes with other famous scientists that were around at the same time. And I thought it was a really cool book, and I highly suggest it. It's called The Gene, and the person's name, I apologize, I really can't pronounce it. Maybe someone else can pronounce
I
it.
think it's Mukherjee.
Sid-
Yeah, Siddhartha Mukherjee.
Yeah.
So what we can do is we can put the names of these articles and links to these books in the show notes on the website.
Okay, so I think now is a perfect time to get into Third Arm on the Right. We've been talking about evolution quite a bit, and I think that this segment kind of highlights the pros and cons of evolution and adaptation together.
We figured we'd take a look at the spotted hyena, which has a very unusual female morphology. So it turns out the female has quite prominent male characteristics in that she has a enlarged clitoris, which is also referred to as a
It's a dick!
It's a dick!
The girls have a huge dick! It's bigger than the guys!
So it's sort of an all-in-one package. So not only does she do her normal like urinary
Oh my god.
processes via this thing, but she also gives birth via this 7-inch
Pseudopenis.
phallic pseudopenis, which sounds incredibly painful, and it is.
And it's also very dangerous. Around 15 or 20% of the first birth of the female leads to death of the female.
Right. Yeah.
So after that, it's like
very high death rate.
it's already like destroyed, and she survives, so it's just easier to give birth.
You know, I don't know.
Assuming-
Can they give birth to multiple litters? I don't know if the pseudopenis is destroyed each time, or destroyed once. and then
I
it's
just
not.
mean like instead of like what we've seen, which is that very narrow, very defined shafts. If it just turns into like I don't know, like an elephant trunk.
I think it likely tears and
Right.
heals. I don't know if that makes it
Right.
any easier the following time that they give birth, but I do think that they have multiple litters.
Interesting.
So how does this happen? Like, why physiologically does this female has this pseudopenis?
Yeah, so it actually turns out that the females will increase production of androgens during the gestation period
Or
of the
androgens.
pups.
So hormones.
Hormones, yeah, specifically male hormones.
Okay.
And so this is thought to be advantageous because it makes the pups more aggressive, which of
Okay.
course is important for this particular species of hyena because actually they're not scavengers like most other species. They
Mhm.
are mostly carnivorous, and
They're
so
hunters.
they're hunters. So
Yeah.
having this increased aggressiveness is very useful for their for this behavior, obviously.
Mhm.
Also, interestingly, this increase in androgen causes the males to start mounting and showing sexual behavior towards the females sooner, which is
Okay.
actually really important because it's incredibly tricky for the male to mate with the female.
Right.
It requires this very kind of tricky dance because he has to line up his penis now with essentially her pseudo penis,
Right.
which is really really difficult. So if the pups start engaging and practicing this sexual activity sooner,
Right.
they'll be more successful later on when it actually is time to mate.
So basically, this male hormone in the females during development, it's important for this aggressive behavior. But the byproduct of it, it's this pseudopenis in the female.
Right, it causes like this enlargement of the clitoris, which leads to the formation of the pseudopenis.
That being said, there are also detriments to, in addition to having a pseudopenis that's difficult to mate with, the females, their ovaries oftentimes are not properly developed, which leads to the issues in fertility in these animals as well. So it's very much so like a delicate balance between the benefit of being hyper aggressive and the cost of being masculinized for the female.
It's the beauty of evolution. There is always a trade-off when you gain a new characteristic. There is usually you gain something, but you lose an advantage in some way. And in this case, I think it's a pretty big disadvantage, which makes me
Yeah.
wonder how this was evolutionary selected for.
So what's also really fascinating is that the hyenas society, so they live in like these large clans that can have up to 80 individuals. They're matriarchal, meaning that the females are basically in charge.
Yeah.
And the females that are higher up in that social ranking produce more of this androgen. So she actually has more aggressive and more competitive and more fit pups. So getting at
Yep.
that selection issue, it actually
That is really cool.
She kind of chooses who mates and who doesn't, right? So if she
Right,
sees
exactly.
another male trying to mate
Right.
with a lower female, she will be aggressive towards both.
Right, and hyenas have incredibly complex social behavior, and they can actually recognize individuals within their clan, and they know where they are in this hierarchy.
Oh.
And so, say a male is mating with a female, if a higher ranked male wants to mate, he has to like dismount and not has to, but recognizes that this is a higher ranked male, probably born of a higher ranked female,
Right.
and then we'll kind of get out of the way and let him have priority.
Oh shit! It's
Yeah.
like Game of Thrones. All the different families. That's awesome. All right, so now let's watch some videos of hyenas attempting to bang. Oh my god, they're actually playing music.
The head of the clan swaggers past, bristling with testosterone. Its penis swings low and proud.
Its penis swings
With its
low and
confident
proud.
rolling gait, this is one cocksure killer. But this well-hung hunter has a secret.
Why is it?
Secret.
He is a sheep.
Oh my god! What's
Okay.
That could
is
be your
the
new
queen
Twitter
of the
handle.
swingers.
Long.
Well
Her
hung
huge
hunter.
member, which many males
that's the
would
girl,
be proud
though.
to bear, is in fact a clitoris.
Oh my god!
That's
I was tricked.
It's a trap.
Closer
It's a
look at
trap.
the family.
I know we
Real
said they
business
had a
male member
pseudopenis, but I didn't
inside.
know it was so long.
Yeah, it's like
longer
7
than
inches.
the males. It is longer than the males.
This family is a sisterhood, a fierce one. These females are some of the most masculine in the world. Sniffing reinforces family bonds, and there's no smell on earth quite like this.
This is ridiculous.
What are they doing?
At the
Sniffing
fetal
each other's
stage, female hyenas come into
genitals.
contact with high levels of male hormones, and it causes more than hair on their chest.
This is
Fucking
a
These
terrible
low-slung
narration.
clitorises
Yeah, I mean, this
are
guy's
even
boring.
capable of an erection.
Fucking National Geographic. Like,
To add to the confusion, they also have a scrotum-like sac, bulging with fat and tissue.
Okay.
It's
that
covered
was
with a thicker
additional
thatch of hair
information.
than that on a male's testicles. With no external vagina, they urinate, mate, and give birth through a canal running down the center of this shaft.
What could have been the evolutionary pressure that led to that being the most proficient way?
I mean, I think this all comes back to them needing to be hyper-aggressive, either to hunt or scavenge, depending on the species of hyena.
So
The more aggressive you are, the more successful you are. The more successful you are, the more fit you are.
True.
So it would drive the
mating looks so
population.
difficult, and then birth seems so difficult.
That's
And
true.
in humans, the birthing process had become more difficult because of medical science being able to allow for women who would normally die during childbirth to have children, so cesarean sections and whatnot. So, I mean, it's just kind of puzzling to me that this would be the evolutionary selection.
Also, you have to think of how many pups they have per litter. Like, humans only on average have 1 or 2 children. And so...
I thought you were going to say humans usually have 1 or 2 pups. So go ahead.
And so maybe it wasn't as disadvantaged is if 10% of the females were not able to give birth because of this, because the numbers make it up for, that might also be a factor.
Does anyone know the purpose for, I didn't know that they had a fake scrotum as well.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Does it produce extra hormones? Because according to this guy, it said it's just like a fatty fake.
Maybe it's a byproduct of the hormones, but I don't know.
I imagine it's likely just a byproduct of the hormones that they are producing to make their pups aggressive.
Just as the pseudopenis is a byproduct of the hormones, which has to go on to make them more aggressive.
It's a byproduct that was selected for.
No, we were talking about that. Probably the pseudopenis wasn't what was selected for.
Do you think maybe it's a kind of a vestigial trait in development when they veer off from, maybe you'd assume that they start off as what you would consider a male, and then it takes a huge turn towards the female reproductive system, like that. Why men have nipples, right? So we all start off as girls, kind of, and then we veer off.
The way I see it is that when the embryo or fetus has the sorry.
Oh, I thought it was like a bug in my shirt. You tickled me.
When the embryo has this rush.
Hey, thank you, Peggy.
When the embryo has this rush of male hormone, that's what makes them hyper aggressive. But it has the byproduct of developing something similar to a male penis. And so you cannot have one without the other, right? So it's not the penis that was selected for per se.
Yeah, I got you.
But it's the aggressivity, and that comes with the pseudopenis.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for listening. You can find me at Prof Squarehead on Twitter.
You can find me at Sebisai on Twitter.
You can find me at Not That Crick.
And I'm at The Scientist Hand.
All right.
Thank you all. Have a great week.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye.